The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's broadcast. We're going to be doing the final of the two-part series, Not Your Daddy's Profit and Loss Statement. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera on so you guys could see me. There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Belinda, and we're going to walk through this new thing that I have. And by new thing, I mean I've really been trying to do a push lately with a lot of our customers to utilize Power BI more for financial purposes. And we're going to talk about why I'm doing that and why I feel like this is important as we get into our presentation. So I've got a lot of content, so let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda, I'm going to give you just a few thoughts and notes. We're going to be using Power GP and Power GP Online concurrently. Doesn't matter which one you use. We're going to be accessing the same view that is in both, so it doesn't really matter. If you happen to not be a GP user, never fear. A couple things are going to be unique to GP, but the concept of what we're doing will resonate regardless of which ERP system that you're using. So want to keep that in mind. And we are going to be heavy on the demos, which is why I'm going to rush through this and my slide deck so that we can get to the real meat and potatoes. I do want to point out that the slide deck today, I do have some DAX code in there, is in the handouts of GoToMeeting. I think everybody knows how to utilize that, so we're not going to get into that. And it wouldn't be an Njevity sponsored session if we didn't talk about our mission statement. The mission statement at Njevity and Power GP Online is very near and dear to every single person's heart. Everything that we do every day revolves around the mission statement. I read the mission statement every single day that I'm working. Sounds hokey, but if you know me, you know I'm hokey. And Chris Stopkins, our fearless leader, is constantly quizzing all of us on what's our mission statement. So wanting to make sure that we're all living it and we're all breathing it, because it makes our job more fun when we do live it, and it definitely benefits everyone we come in contact with. So our mission is to improve the life and success of our partners and customers by providing exceptional business application experiences that simplify, inform, and delight. And today I hope that I'm going to inform you, and I'm no doubt that many of you, if not all of you, are going to be delighted by the simplicity on what I'm doing. We're going to actually build out things in the course of this hour. And so I even have a gift offer at the end for everybody who's attending. So I want to start out with a poll question. This is just for me so that I understand what's going on. So the first poll question, I'm going to watch over on my other screen. Sorry, I got 3 monitors. If you guys would answer that, I want to know what application you're using currently for your financial statements. And I am not trying to prevent you from not using it, by the way. I just want to know which one of those that are being used. And overwhelmingly, it is Management Reporter and FRX. Not surprised by that. Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. If you didn't vote, that's okay. I at least have an understanding of where we are and where I want to talk to you guys about. All right, so let's get started with my notes and my thoughts. So this is a typical financial statement, and I found this image on Bing, and the year is 2010, and I'm like, oh, that's appropriate because this is really an old format of financial statements. And many of you who look at financial statements like this, one of the first things that you're going to admit to yourself is when it's time to read it, you pull out the ruler and you find the line and you start going down, right? We all do that. Everybody does that. And I've been working with customers and users building financial statements for almost 28 years now. And without doubt, the balance sheet and the P&L, there's virtually no changes. The only differences is how detailed do you want it or how simplified do you want it? Maybe you want to compare to a previous year or to a budget. That might be a little bit different, but for the most part, they're exactly the same. And one of the things I find it interesting is the way we get our data has definitely changed. The way we store data, the accessibility we have to our data has dramatically changed. So why are we using these same old formats? Who could read them, right? Some CPAs could read them, CFOs could read them, department heads of the finance, maybe some of the people in finance could read them, but department heads and managers, not so much. So I was working with one of our New York customers that I've had for many years. And they're like, well, we have about 30 people who need to look at financial statements. And so we send them out in Excel, 30 people. And I thought, now your company isn't that big. So I'm willing to bet of those 30 people, only a tiny handful could read that financial statement really and truly. And then the bulk of the other people, they're either just looking at bottom line, like what's the bottom line, or what's this one account? That's all I care about. Or some probably aren't even looking at it at all. So how do we make it easier for those people to consume the data and to utilize it in a better way? And that's what this is about. It's about the operational purposes, because this older format of financial statements, it's not going away. That question I asked about which system you're using, that's not going to change. You're still going to need those statements that look like this. You're going to need them for banks. You're going to need them for any kind of lending institution. You're going to need them for potentially your board of directors. You're going to need them for governmental institutions. You're going to have to still have those formats. But from an operational point of view, we want to do something a little bit different. We want to make it easier to consume operational data. And that's what we're going to do here today, is talk about how to make Power BI easier, or use Power BI to make it easier to consume that operational information. Now, the first thing we need to pay attention to is our chart of accounts. You need to understand your chart of accounts. And as a developer, I'm assuming many of you are designers, report designers, and I might be calling you developer. Don't freak out if you're not technically a developer. But if you've designed some of these reports, then, even if you haven't, this webinar is still for you. You can get a feel for it. But you have to understand the foundation of your chart of accounts before you can begin doing anything. And personally, I like to think of it as the skeleton of the financials, right? And I'm not going to read this. This came from like one of the science websites, scienceanswers.com. And I highlighted all the words of what would happen if we didn't personally have a skeleton, because this is what would happen to our business if we didn't really have a chart of accounts, or if we didn't understand them. We're going to have all kinds of failures by not understanding them. And not really understanding them is kind of like asking your child over this upcoming holiday, your adolescent child, the ones that are at the age where they roll their eyes, to write a book report on War and Peace over the holidays. The bulk of them aren't going to do it. Just like if you didn't really understand your chart of accounts, nobody's ever going to make any changes to any way to consume financial data. They're just not. They're going to just throw that old statement out there to everybody and say, figure it out on your own. And the ones that do, they're going to just really do a really poor job, because it's too hard for them. It's out of their depth. It's out of their area of expertise. So let's dig into the GP chart of accounts. And again, if you're not using GP, don't worry about it. You'll get some understanding. Just think about the things I'm pointing out in terms of your chart of accounts. Now, in this particular window, I have the desktop client and the web client window side by side for the account maintenance from GP. And that's because I'm a big promoter of the web client. And if you're not using the web client, I want you to see it's really not any different. So if we look at this particular window, if you're a GP user, you're familiar with this window, there are three things I want to point out that are incredibly valuable when we're building out financial statements in the world of Power BI, particularly in terms of GP. One of them is the category, where you see the number one, regardless of which window you're looking at. Where the number one is located, that is our category. Now, there are 48 categories out of the box. We're going to talk about them more in just a few moments. Setting those categories right, if you've never done it in the past, then you're really sitting pretty, because I would encourage you to go through and revisit setting those up right. You can dump out the data and import them back in correctly. Work with your partner to help you get that done. They could either do it using SQL perhaps, or using some other tool if you don't have the integration tool. But taking advantage of using those categories is quite the big deal now. And some of the other applications for financial statements, they weren't quite as big a deal. And so many people just said, oh, I'm going to leave it. And frequently we walk in and we see people with everything set up to cash. I encourage you to rework those. Those are important now. And in the world of GP, we also have question 2, what posting type is this? And this really isn't referencing which financial statement this falls on. This is referencing, hey, when I close the year out, do I want the balance to roll forward like a balance sheet account? Or do I want it to close out to retain earnings like a profit and loss account? So we want to make sure we have that question set correctly. And because those two options are static in GP, we can actually use them to our advantage in Power BI, and I'll show you that in a moment. And then we also have the typical balance. Now, the typical balance, you guys know from building financial statements, if you've built them in like Jet, Management Reporter, Active Reporter, BI 360, whatever you're using, it brings in the balance. And if the balance is a debit balance, then it shows as a positive. And if it's a credit balance, it shows as a negative. That's how, when you're looking at one individual balance number, that's how it distinguishes the difference between the two. Now, a lot of people will think, oh, what's a typical balance, like accumulated depreciation? And they'll say, oh, it's actually a credit balance. And yes, technically it is, but it's an asset, and assets have debit balances. So we want to make sure, just so we can take advantage of using these to our advantage, and you don't have to, there's a couple different ways to do it, but the way I'm going to show you today, you're going to want to make sure that that typical balance is set up to match the type of account it is. Is it an asset? Is it an expense? Therefore, it should have a debit balance. If it's a liability, equity, or revenue, it should have a credit balance. Regardless of what we know, the balance will probably end up being. Now, I want to talk about the account format structure. You also want to know your account format structure. And in the world of GP, it could vary from business to business. You could have up to 10 segments. They could have up to 66 characters. So on the slide deck, I point out where that is. And you want to know what each segment represents if you have segments. We also have the ability to name our segments in GP. And I put the link to naming the segment there. Naming this segment in GP is advantageous for some things, like maybe not the natural account, but definitely any kind of department or a liability, because then you won't have to rename them again. You could utilize some of those segment name fields in there. I'll leave that up to you, but I do like to point that out. That's how you can assign a name and then have the name dynamically pull from GP. Now, I promised we'd come back and talk about categories for a moment. Two things I want to point out. Number one, I'm showing you the link where you could set up the categories. You could rename them to whatever you want to rename them to. Out of the box, there are 48. And the two things I want to point out is number 48, non-financial account, that is not unit accounts. Unit accounts do not get assigned a category. So personally, I hate number 48. I think it should be removed. The second thing I want to point out is if you add more, and you could add as many as you want, you're not going to see a number. Instead, you'll see an asterisk. And the asterisk actually does have a number in the SQL table. I don't know why GP doesn't display it in the window, but when we access the categories, we can actually see a number. So for example, I've added training accounts. It shows an asterisk. In the database itself, it's really number 49, and I know that. Now, what I encourage you, if you're not using categories, you might want to take the opportunity before you set up a lot of reports to reorganize your categories. And my recommendation is make them match the line items of your most detailed financial statements. And then that way you can combine and pull some of them together. But you definitely will be happy that you did that. It does take a little bit of work, but there's going to be some big payoff at the end. Now, one more thing I really want us to know about, we need to pay attention, regardless of what system we have, is our beginning balance numbers. How do the beginning balances work? So when we're working with a single fiscal or calendar year, how do we know it's a beginning balance? In the world of GP, we have a differentiator. There's two things that make the line items for beginning balances unique, actually. One of them is the field called source document. And if you've ever keyed in a general ledger journal, you see it usually defaults to GJ, depending on how you had it set up. But all beginning balances will have a BBF in the field called source document. That is not something that we do. That's something that happens inherently in the system. So we know automatically those are beginning balances. The second thing I want to point out is the date. The date of those beginning balances will actually be the last date of the previous fiscal period. So if I close out the year 2018 in January of 2019, it'll be in the fiscal year 2019 but it's going to be dated December 31st, 2018. So those are some things that I want to think about. We're going to be addressing some of those. You also might want to think about whether or not you want just the general ledger date, or do you also want to include the date it was posted? And so I think that's a pretty cool thing to include. All right, so we're almost through with our notes, I promise. And whoops. So I want to talk about what these statements, balance sheets, and profit and loss are meant to reveal as we go on. So the first one is, what do you own on a balance sheet? Assets, you guys know most of this. Liabilities, what you owe. Equity, what claims are made by the owners. And sometimes you want details of AR, AP, and you probably want to know net profit. Net profit is actually considered part of the equity, but you might want to know that separately as well. So the details we typically want to know are the ones that are in colors, not the ones that I have listed by numbers. The detail from an operational point of view, we typically want to know more about AR, more about AP, and we want to know more about the equity itself. So typically a balance sheet account or a balance sheet report, you could do, in theory, you could do it just big picture and get away with it, and then operationally get into those details. And I know I didn't tell you guys anything you didn't know. So hopefully when I get into building them, they'll get a little more exciting for you. So profit and loss, what is it meant to reveal? It's meant to reveal sales, cost of goods sold, depending on the kind of business that you're in, expenses, and the net income or loss. Often we don't want to just know the complete net income. A lot of times we want to know something called EBITDA, which is the earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Meaning, what is the real net profit? So if we took our revenue and we took all of our expenses and cost of goods sold, how much money's left? And that we know we have to pay taxes on it. We might have interest income. We might have interest expense. But factoring in what did the business really bring in before we get into some of those big picture things. And then we often want to do a comparison to previous periods, previous budgets. And sometimes we want to do comparisons between companies. And these are all things that we can do in the world of GP. So I'm going to go ahead and just end this slideshow temporarily. And now it's going to get real interesting for me because I have a lot of notes I want to show you guys, and we're going to start building out. So the first thing I want to do is I'm looking at Power BI Desktop if you've never worked in Power BI before. And you could download Power BI Desktop for free and use it for free. And this is where we're going to spend all of our time today. We're not going to go in and look at anything inside of the Power BI service because this is all about the building. So what I'm going to do is just go into Query Editor for a moment. And here's my Query Editor because there's a couple things that I want to point out to you. So first of all, in this particular case, you could go and see the source that you connected to. In this case, I'm connected to GP. And this one I did through SQL. I also have a version of this where I go in through Power GP Online. Same thing, I'm accessing a view that Microsoft creates for us called account transactions. And I'm doing a little bit of cleanup on the account transactions. So if I were to look at the way it gets pulled in when I connect to it, I have 121 columns, as you could see right there in the bottom, 121 columns. That's way too much. I don't need that many for what I'm about to do, nor do I want to work with that many. So I'm going to do a lot of cleanup there. And I have what I call Belinda's 3 rules. When I do this, the first one is I name the query something that makes sense. So it initially started out as account transactions with no spaces. I made it GL account transactions. The second rule is I like to clean up the columns that I don't need. And I even err on the side of caution and get rid of columns that I'm not sure if I need because it's far too easy to go back and add them. So what I'm going to do is I come in and I use this choose column setting. And when I do that, I could come in and pick and choose the columns that I wanted. So I've gone through and selected a few columns that I want, and I'm going to add a few more right here. So I'm going to come in and just search for any of them that have the word type in there. And I'm going to add posting type. And yes, I'm cheating and looking at my notes. And oh, actually, I don't want that one. I want posting type from account master. And the reason why I want the posting type from account master, if the posting type changed, if I posted a transaction and then I changed the posting type on the card, this is a GP only thing. I want it to follow the one on the card so I have consistency. And I do the same with the account name. So I do the same there. So, okay, now I have my posting type. And then I also want to get the typical balance. So there's my typical balance, and I think I got them all. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now I have 24 columns. So I've actually added to the number of columns that I have. Let me come in to that posting type column, and I'm going to come down to the bottom, and I'm going to rename that. So it's just posting type. It doesn't have all that account master. So I do a lot of cleanup here. And one of the things, oops, that was not smart. Got rid of my E. There we go. Okay. So one of the things that you're going to want to do is, then the third rule is make sure each column type is set right. So as we go through this, I'll show you what I mean. Journal entry is one of the columns I kept. Out of the box, it comes over as a numerical value. I don't want it to act like a number. I want it to act like a string. So I changed it to text. So I go through all of these line by lines and add all of them. Let's see, account description from master file. I don't want account description from account master, just like that posting type. I want to get rid of from account master and just leave account description. So that's something that's going to help me out a lot as well. Account category, I'm going to get rid of that number because I just want the account category. Now, I don't think you could get the account category number, the actual numerical value, like we looked at that one I added was 49. But you might want to consider adding something in to use that account category, because then you could use that in some of your formulas to help you figure out. And I'll talk about that more when we get into formulas where that would make some sense. I also like to add in, personally, I like to add in the sequence number, the line item sequence number. And the first thing I do is change it to a whole number, and then I change it to text because I want it to act like text. This just ensures I have every unique line item. If you have a journal entry in GP that has the same account number used twice, it might consolidate them and aggregate them together and just give you the total. And if I want to include every single individual record, then I need to have the line item sequence on there, even though it's something that I do not typically use. Now, one other thing I want to talk about is I did include the void columns. In GP, you can set it up where you can't delete an unposted transaction. And if you do that, then the only option is to void it. And like any other transaction in GP, now you might have voided transactions in here. So we want to get rid of those. And we could do that very easily just by using the filter. And I'm going to use the text filter, and I'm going to say it equals, and then I will choose no from the drop-down list. And the reason why I did it this way is I didn't happen to have any voids. And so if I just used the filter and checked no, left no checked, well, yes hasn't happened yet. So if it ever does happen, it would include that. But this way, it will ensure I only get transactions that are not voided. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now I no longer need that column, so I could right mouse click and remove it. And that's because it's doing everything in applied steps. And you could come in and, whoops, reopen some of those steps up. You saw me do that. But you typically want to come in and rename your steps as you're working. I probably will not be doing this for the sake of speed from here on out, but let's see. I just wanted to show you how you could rename those and always get back to those individual steps. All right, so we've got that done. Now, another thing I want to point out is in this particular file, we do have a period ID. This period ID is a fiscal period ID from GP. So if you're not on a calendar year, this becomes incredibly important to you. So you want to utilize this because if I were just to extract the month from the transaction date, then it would show me July would be 7. And if that happens to be the first period of my fiscal year, then I want to be able to use that as period 1. So that's why that's important there. So we have the fiscal period right here. We also have our fiscal years. And these are the years that are set up inside of the period setup in GP as well. When something moves to history, it ends up in this history year column, but if it's open, then it's showing in the open one. And there's some that are even unposted, and so there are no years there. So we have to deal with all of these. And what I want to do is merge these together so that I could look at my fiscal year. I don't care when I'm doing analysis, whether it's history or open, and I don't want to have to deal with 2 periods. So as part of our building here, we're going to clean this up. And what we could do is I'm going to highlight both of these, go to the transform menu, and replace the value of null, and I won't put anything in there. Now these are both strings, so the fact that I leave it completely empty is okay. And so now if there is no value, there's going to be a value in one or the other, and if there's not a value in either one, it's unposted. So now I have my open year. And now I could come in and merge these together. So under transform, I'll click on merge columns, and I'm going to call this fiscal year, and merge these together with nothing in between. And now I have just the year. And again, I have this blank area here. If it's unposted, you can see the work right there. I'm not sure this is why these have a status of work and still have a fiscal year. That obviously is part of the wonderful FabricCam database. But in your real world, that would not happen. All right, so we've got our fiscal years and we've merged them together. Now, if you're want to be able to use a field in a slicer value or a filter where it has the fiscal period and the fiscal year next to it combined, so you don't have to use those independently, we can do some things to make those happen as well. So let's do that now. What I'm going to do is take this fiscal period and I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to duplicate the column. There we go. And then while I'm at it, I'm going to come back over here. Well, let me just do fiscal period first. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a text field. And now I have it set up as text. And now what I'll do is I'm going to come up and add another column and add a custom column. Now, as a rule, and I'm going to break my rule in this webinar, as a rule, I only like to add custom columns when I'm adding a string field in, meaning I want the same value to appear on every record, or for simple math. And I'll be doing both here of these today. I want a 0 to appear in that field. So I'll just put it in double quotes. I'm just going to leave the name custom right now because I'll be getting rid of it. And I'm going to set this to a string again. So now I have a 0 and my period. Now you have to select these in the right order. I'm going to do custom and period ID. And then once again, I'm going to merge these and I'm not going to put anything in between them. And now I have a 0. There we go. I have a 0 before my merge field. So I'm going to get rid of these. Now, you don't have to go through all this extra work if you're on a calendar year. This is just if you're on a fiscal year. Now, the reason I did this is because any value that has only one digit, when I turn this, look at this, and when I sort it, I want it to sort like 0 or 1 to be before, or let me do it this way, 2 to be before 10. And if I were to load more, now you're going to see I have 0, 10, 0, 11, 0, 12. So what I want to do is lop off the 2 right characters. So I'm just going to right mouse click, and I'm going to do a split column by the number of characters. And this one we'll call fiscal period. There we go, fiscal period. I'm going to do as far, whoops, I didn't do that right. That wasn't the way I meant to do that. Let me just close that out. I want 2 characters as far right as possible. I was trying to name it at the same time, which wasn't what I meant to do. So now here it is, and it reverted back to a whole number. So I'm going to change it back to a text, and it's going to allow me to replace the text formatting with where it changed it to a whole number. So I get that 0 back. Now I no longer need this column, and now I'm going to rename this one to fiscal period. Now I'm caught up. Okay. Now I'm going to come back and get that year, that fiscal year. Where did we put it? Nope, there it is. So I'm going to duplicate this. And now I'm going to grab again in the right order, I have my fiscal year and I have my fiscal period. You know, I probably want to clean up though. I probably want to get the correct year right here, right? If it's work, I probably want to be able to do that. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove getting that duplicate column. And now I'm going to come in and just get the year of the transaction. So that way I've got that set up as well. So I'm going to highlight the transaction date. And I'm just going to make the assumption that if it's a transaction, it would be in the same calendar year. You probably want to get rid of it anyhow. You know, trying to decide which way I want to go. Well, just to give you a feel for what it looks like. Sorry, I'm being a little wishy-washy there. I need to stick to my notes. Okay, so that's what I get for thinking while I'm talking. I'm going to highlight the transaction date and then go over to date on add a column area and tell it I just want to get the year. And now that's going to populate it at the end, but it's going to make it numerical. And I want to add these together or merge them together, so I need to make it a text. You can't merge a number with a text. So, and I'm going to take the year now, hold my control key down and select the fiscal period. And now I'm going to merge these together. And I want to merge them with just a little dash. And we'll call this period, just period. And so now I have this cool little field here that I could use that has the period, and I could get rid of these 2. Now, that's just one way you can clean up and do a lot of things. By utilizing this, I can still control the filter of whether or not I want work, unposted transactions to display or not. So I could still take those out for the ones that are uncleared. So a little bit of that is pretty cool. One more thing that I want to do as I'm looking through my list. Oh, and yeah, so there's ways you could just get the fiscal period in DAX in the other in Power BI proper if you're on a calendar year, or you could do without doing a bunch of extra steps like incremental steps like I did here. You could just create like an Excel function, and we'll be doing a lot of DAX today. So you'll get an idea of how that will work in just a moment. But one of the things I want to address, I'm going to come back over here and find my debit amounts and credit amounts. Let me get rid of the word amount. This just helps me. Okay, so I have debit and credits. And what I want to do on my debits and credits is I want to create a column that has the net amount. And I'm actually going to do 2 of them. I'm going to do one where it's debit minus credits, and I'm going to do one where it's credit minus debits. That way, if I want to do just a visual for revenue, it could look at the net credit amount, and then that way it won't be negative, it will be positive. So it would only be negative if my revenue was actually negative. So I could basically look at it as positive or negative. If you've done it in Management Report or FRX, is the same as reversing the sign. In Jet Report, it's the same as putting that little dash there, negative, in front of your formula. So what I'm going to do, under Add Column, I'm going to do another custom column, and I'm going to call this one Net Debit. And this was the other kind of custom column I really never have a problem doing. And on net debit, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come in and I just realized I did my period column wrong when I was getting all wishy-washy, but that's okay. You'll get another idea of what I was going to do in a moment. All right, so on net debit, I'm going to do my debit minus my credit, and I have no syntax error. So simple math works just fine. And I'm going to do another one for net credit. And the net credit will be credit. I'm just double clicking on them, minus debit. You don't need the spaces. I just put the spaces there to make them easier for you to see. So now at the end, I have these two fields. I'm going to highlight both of them, go to the Home tab and set them both for decimal. So now these will act like numbers. So I have my two net columns listed here as well. All right. Now what I want to show you, and again, you could do those in DAX as well. There is an advantage to creating these net columns and doing a lot of them in DAX rather than here. If you're in the Power BI service and you choose the option to analyze in Excel, it will not see any numbers that are that were created in this query editor as a number. It'll only see fields or columns that are created in DAX as a number. So there is a definite advantage to using DAX, but we're going to be using some other numbers in DAX, so you'll get a feel for that as we go along. All right, so now what I want to do, we have this reference field here, and I also brought in this description field, which is a little more information on the journal entries. First thing I'm going to do is trim those up. You could go to Transform and then Format and Trim, or just right mouse click and Transform and Trim. And that gets all the blank spaces off at the end. Now, the fact that I selected those in that order was deliberate because now I want to merge them together with just a simple space. And we're going to call this one GL reference. And I'm going to click OK. So now I have one single column called Journal Entry Reference that shows me a little more information about what I've included here. So that's something that's very helpful. The next thing I want to talk about, you can see we're doing a lot of cleanup here because I want to really kind of cover a lot of this information. And this is the originating posted date. This is the date it actually posted. Now, of course, if it hasn't posted yet, if it's work, it's going to have a date of 1/1/1900, which is a void date. And the way I want to work with dates when I'm in Power BI, I don't want anything with that 1/1/1900 date because I want Power BI to create a calendar that includes all my dates, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. So what I want to do is change the actual posting date so that if it's 1/1/1900, it's blank. So that's what I want to do now. So what I'm going to do, I was just going through my notes to make sure. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do is create a function or a new conditional column that calculates that. So under add column, I'm going to choose conditional. And what I'll do, I'm going to call this posted date posted on, or posted on date. And I'm going to come in and say if the column, and let me find that originating posted date, if it equals 1/1/1900, now it knows it's a calendar, so it allows me to select it from a calendar. If it's 1/1/1900, then I want it to be blank. Otherwise, let me do it this way. Does not equal, then let me get the column, the data from the column originating posted date. Otherwise, I'll leave it blank. So that's how I'm going to get that. And it put a null in for me. And that's fine. I'm going to leave the null in there, but I'm going to change that to date. So now I don't have 1/1/1900 in my data set anymore. I just have the posted date and a null if it's not been posted. So I'm going to remove that as well. So now my data file only consists of real dates, and no dates are really old. Okay, cool, got that. Now the last thing I want to do before we go in and get out of Query Editor and start working in Power BI again is I want to deal with those balance brought forward accounts. Remember I said in GP, because that's period 0. In GP, it's going to show as a beginning, as a source document, a BBF, but the date is really what I'm concerned about, because the date is going to end up showing in with the first day or the last day of the previous fiscal year. So if I narrow it down, if I'm on a calendar year, this is the easiest way to explain it, and I say just show me 2018, I'm going to miss my beginning balances for 2018. So I need to do something with those dates. So I'm going to go back to my transaction date right here, and under add a column, I'll choose date. And I don't want to do it that way. I want to do a custom column. So this is where I'm breaking my own rule over only doing custom columns for simple math or strings. And we're going to call this one BBF date. And I'm going to put in a formula for this. And the formula, this is why I don't like to do any other custom columns, because this is part of the M language. It is going to be date.addDays. And then I'm going to choose my transaction date, put a comma, and then put 1. Add 1 day to the transaction date. Now I have my original transaction date, and I have my balance brought forward transaction date, which is 1 day later. And that'll take care of my beginning balance. So now what I need to do is create a new journal entry date that is unique, that looks and says, oh, if it's period 0 or BBF, then get it from the BBF date. And if it's not, then get it from the transaction date. So what I'm going to do here is do a conditional column again, and we'll call this one journal entry date. And we're going to say if, now we could do this one of two ways. We could do source document equal to BBF, or we could do period ID is equal to 0. And if it is, we're going to, let me say not equal, it does not equal 0, because that way should run a little faster because it'll stop at that point. There are going to be more transactions that are not period 0. So I'm going to select a particular column, and the column I'll select will be transaction date. And if it is period 0, I'm going to select the column called BBF date, and I'll click OK. Now I have this new journal entry date column, and I'm going to make it a date, and then I'm going to get rid of my 2 other date columns that I added, the BBF date and the transaction date. So we'll remove those columns, and now I have this new journal entry date that I'm going to use instead. Whew, that was a lot of data modeling. So now let's go back to home and close and apply, and our fields will be updated accordingly, and we'll have some of those new things in there. But we're not done with data modeling, not yet. A couple of things that we want to do here. I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. And the first thing that I want to do is change how some of the fields will work and look. So I'm going to go into the data mode over here. And when I go into the data mode, like let's start with dates. Now, when we set the data type in the query editor, we were setting how the data field will work. Now we're going to be able to see how it will display. And we have 2 date periods here side by side. You could see it's displaying like with the whole long date format. We don't want that. So I'll start with posted on date. I'll go to modeling, and I've got it set to a date here, but I'm going to change the format of how it's viewed by clicking on format. And this is how we can handle the way our formats are used. All right, a couple other things we may want to do. We may want to change so that our numerical values here are acting like currencies. So I'm going to take this net debit, and I'm going to go to general currency, or I could have changed it to general currency here in the format. And I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 decimal places. So I always wanted to show 2 decimal places. The problem if you don't do that, like here's a case here, if I zoom in, where you could see $50.70 is leaving off the ending 0. So we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to do the net credit the same way. I'll change it to currency, general currency, which will be the currency that works with the kind of install I had. I have a US install, so it puts that down. So now I've got both of those. And you might want to clean up a lot of things there. Now I want to talk about dates a little bit more because I want to be able to use some functions like year to date. So I can get my year to date number in here. And to do that, I need to have a table that has every single day of every calendar year that is going to be in use. That's why I got rid of that year that date 1/1/1900, because I'm going to let DAX look at all of my data set, look at all of the dates, and make sure I have every single day of every calendar year accounted for. And I mean every single day, even if I don't have transactions for it. And to do this, I am going to cheat a little bit here. I've given you guys in the slide deck, I've got my formulas. What I'm going to do right on this modeling tab is I'm going to click on new table, and I'm going to create this table from DAX from scratch with a code. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in, and let me get rid of that little indexing there. So I'm creating a date table, and there we go. I was trying to zoom. Okay, so I've got my date. I'm telling it to, in this particular table, to add columns, and I'm saying create the calendar automatically. Now what this 12 indicates is if you're in a fiscal year, you could define what the last period of your fiscal year is, and that way it'll know what year to date would be. So if your year ends June, you would want to have a 6 there. So it knows year to date, if I'm looking at August, is from July 1st through August 31st. I'm also extracting out the year from the calendar, the month name, the date. Actually, that's the month number. So period, August would be 8, the month name, the weekday, and the quarter. And in the quarter, I'm saying get the quarter number and put a Q in front of it. So that's what I'm doing. Let me go ahead and click on the checkbox to commit that. And now I have my table. And this table represents every potential date that my data represents. So I'm going to come in really quickly here and format this to just be a date. And let me format it so that I'm just seeing a date, because I want to use that a lot. Now, a couple other things that I could do while I'm here, you can see I have all of my fields. One of the things that I want to do is I want my numbers to sort on visuals chronologically and not alphabetically. So I'm going to highlight the month here. And again, under modeling, I'll choose sort by column, and I'll choose sort by month number. And now it'll sort chronologically by this month number. And now I'm going to just right mouse click on this and hide that month number in my report view, because I would never need to use it. And you'll notice that it's dimmed out, so I no longer see that. And I might want to do the same thing with the weekday if I wanted to use weekdays. But I always use the same script. It's really easy to copy and paste into any Power BI table that I have. So now I have that all set up. Now, one last thing we need to do in order to utilize some DAX formulas like year to date, while I'm here on this table, on the modeling ribbon, there is something called mark as date table. So I'm going to identify this table as being my date table. And the only thing I have to do is tell it which field or which column represents the date. And the fact that I have every single calendar date accounted for these dates, it's telling me that my validation was indeed successful. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now, you might be wondering why it started with January there. If I were to sort this ascending, you notice now it goes back, or it showed July. I don't know why it just pulled it up that way, but it does have the full calendar year of every single account number that I've listed there. So that's pretty cool. All right, we've got all that done. So we're in good shape. Now we want to add some other DAX columns. One of the things that we want to do is we want to be able to identify, I'm back at my GL1, we want to be able to identify what are assets, what are liabilities, and so forth. And there's a couple ways you can do that. In this particular example, what I'm going to do is come up and add a column to do this. So I'm going to come up and just say add a column, and I'm going to start with my asset column, and I'm just going to minimize this to make it easier for you to see or maximize it. So I'm going to come up, and the column name here, let me work this way. The column name here will be called assets. Okay, so here's my assets. And I'm cheating. I'm looking at my note to make sure I get it right. All right, so what I want to do, actually, yeah, that's fine. Okay. I was working a little bit out of order, but that's okay. I'm going to do an if statement, and this is very much like Excel, you notice, but this is actually called DAX, and you could use DAX in the pivot table in Excel as well. So first thing it's asking me for is a logical test. So what is my logical test? So the first thing I'm going to do is look for my posting type, and I'm going to say, is my posting type equal to balance sheet? And I'll put that in double quote. Now, that's my first function. So is it set up to be balance sheet? So I'll put a comma. And then I want one more if statement in there, because I also don't just want balance sheet. And let me do that. I don't just want balance sheet. I also want to know if the typical balance is a debit. So is it a balance sheet? And then is it a debit? Then it's probably an asset. So I'm going to start typing in balance, and there's my typical balance from that account. Is that equal to, and again in double quotes, debit? If you don't spell it right, it won't work. All right, so is it equal to a debit? And if it is, then I'm going to get the net debit amount. That's how I'm using that. And if it's not, I'll get a 0. And then the outside if statement, I'll put another comment and put a 0 and end it there. So I've nested 2 if statements inside of itself, and I'm going to commit that. And let me go back. And when I go back, I should have an asset column here. Now, those aren't asset accounts, but if I click on the filter there, I should see asset accounts listed. So those are my asset accounts. All right, and it's set to a decimal number. I'm not going to format the currency just to save time. So there's a lot of these that we want to add. We want to add, I'm just going to copy and paste just to save time, because I do have all these functions in my list. I'm going to do liabilities, which are balance sheets with a typical balance of credit. So that's one. We'll commit that. And it tried to add that to the wrong spot. That's what I get for being cheeky. Let's click there, and I tried to add, I don't know what I tried to add here. Let's come up and undo. There we go. So let's click back on this table. There we go. Go to column. There we go. And now I'll click there. Now I have my liabilities and equity. I'm going to do the same for my revenue. Oh, that's probably why I did that. Let me just right mouse click here. I'll save myself a little bit of grief. There's my revenue. This one is profit loss, and this one is credit. Now, you could also do this with segments of your chart of accounts. You could just do ranges if you want, using the conditional section inside of the query editor. There's a large variety of ways you can do this, but the point is that I am identifying these as unique fields, and that's what we're trying to get at. Okay, so here are expenses. And then finally, I'm going to create one for net profit. And net profit is going to simply be me using the DAX formula I created for revenue and expenses together. So I'm saying the revenue account column I created minus expenses. So now I've defined my categories. You could define as many of these as you want that makes sense. Now, one more thing that I want to do before I leave here is I also want to, I'm going to just copy and paste this one as well. I'm going to create one for, let me make this bigger, for payee. And what this one is doing is I'm saying if the originating master name is blank, then put the source document. Otherwise, put the originating master name. So that way I have this unique field called payee, and I could use it as part of my field. So I have not just the journal entry number, but if I use the payee field, it's not going to be blank for general ledger entries. It's going to actually put the source document. So it would show GJ, for example. So I could take advantage of using some of those. All right, so now we have done all the modeling we want to do. And all that's incredibly important, and I know we're about out of time, and I'm going to end up going over with that a little bit. Oh, BBF question. Could you have done a calculation instead with period 0? Absolutely, Jen. I sure could have. There's a large variety of ways to do that. That's a good point. So we not only have to worry about BBF as the source document, but another identifier to that is that it's period 0. And we could take advantage of using that as well. Will the date table add future dates automatically, or do they need to be manual afterwards? No. The way I did this with automatic calculation, all future dates will automatically get added every time I refresh. Every time I refresh the data, all of the DAX formulas, tables, and columns automatically get refreshed as well after the data refreshes. So it automatically add it. If you cannot get rid of, if you're going to have older dates in there, which might, for example, include somebody's birthday, then what you would want to do instead then is do your dates or some other functions in there where you can identify the date range or put in a minimum and maximum on a particular field. So that's something you could do as well. Okay. All right. So now that we've got that done, now let's get a little bit excited. Let's have a little bit of fun. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to do a profit and loss statement first. Okay. So on the profit and loss statement, what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to put a slicer up here for the year, and you could use the fiscal year or the calendar year. In this example, I'm going to use my fiscal year just so you can get a feel for it. So here is a slicer for my fiscal year. Now that I've got that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a card visual. Do not underestimate the power of a single number. So what I'm going to do here for this is I'm going to find that DAX formula that I created called revenue. There it is. And it's behind my microphone in case you're wondering why I was looking. All right. And so here is my revenue. Now, a little bit of cleanup I want to do on this. I'm going to go into format. The first thing I'm going to do is change the display units to none so it doesn't round. And of course, I could put the dollar value up there if I wanted to. I'm going to collapse that. On the category label, I'm going to change that color to black so it stands out a little more, and I'm going to make it a little bigger because I'm going to copy this over a lot, so I want to make sure it's good and readable. And now that I've got that done, I'm also going to come in and change the background color, so I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to make it green. So there's my revenue. I'm going to copy and just paste that twice, and just stretch the other two out. Now for this one, let's come in and replace the revenue with our expenses. There's our expenses. And on this one, let's make it net profit. Now let's go and format these. So net profit, we will change the background color to blue. And on expenses, we're going to change them to red. So now that quick and easy, we've got some really simple data that we can include here. And I'm sorry I'm taking so long. Oh, what does the finished product look like? Yeah, and you know what? I'm pretty close to the end, so let me give you guys a little bit of glimpse, and then I'll go back. I'll stay on and finish it out because I do have a question, and I'll do my last poll question too in a moment, and then I'll stay on and finish building this out, and then you could watch the recorded version and just skip right to the end. This is kind of what the ending product looks like. Oops, that one's the balance sheet, but here's a profit and loss. We select a year, so you're looking at your years across as you go along. This is bottom line. And if you hover over any particular month, you're going to see those three numbers. That's what a lot of people are used to seeing. Now, account balances, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to look at account balances, but these are account balances based for each month of the year. And of course, I'm going to show you how to add year to date on there as well. These are net change. And so if I were to look at one of these, I could see, see the basically the net change as we go along. Of course, I do have the beginning balances in January, so you might want to filter out the net change, but you could come in and select a year. Oh, no, I don't have the beginning balances filtered out, sorry. And then I've got the months there. I've got balance sheet accounts where I'm also looking at a percent change year over year. And the same with balance sheet accounts. And I just did a distinguishing identifier of putting in a filter where I filtered out balance sheet accounts to profit and loss accounts. That's another great use of just using those as a filter. Journal entries, I did something a little bit different. I have these T accounts. These are our account numbers. But instead of using journal entry numbers, I actually have that. I have master name. This is the version I can give you, but I recommend you use that payee name. And then that way, as you're looking at a particular period, so let me go in and look at April. I could see the effect, for example, that Plaza One has. Let me come up here. That Plaza One has on our company. And so you could look at any of these side by side as you go along. In the version I'm going to give you, guys, I also have bank balances, vendors, and payables information. I won't get into those, but I do have that available. Let me turn that on because I am getting close to the end, but I'm going to go ahead and finish everything out. So while you are looking at answering this question as to whether or not you want that free copy, since I'm already 1 minute over, I'm going to keep building. Okay. Yep, great. For the ones that answered, yes, you want it, but you don't use GP, that's perfectly cool because the data is going to come built in. I will pay attention to you, and I'll make sure I send you or give you access to download the desktop file with the data. For the people who do use GP, then you're going to actually get this. I'm going to close that poll out real fast. Then you're going to actually get it where you could run it with your own data. So for those who do not use GP, you'll get the desktop file with data in it so you can see and play with it. Just don't do a refresh. And be careful opening up the query editor because I might try to change it to Excel to make it a little easier for you. That'd probably be easier. All right, so now back to the report here. What I'm going to do, because we don't have a whole lot longer to go, and I'm going to stretch this out. This is a line chart. Oh, that's the waterfall. I want the line chart. So I've got the line chart. And what I'm going to do here in the values, I'm going to put in revenue, expenses, and I will put in net profit. There we go. Now, I've got those three in. Now, I don't have anything in the axis. That's why we're seeing it all in one individual line. So now I'm going to take the month and put it in the axis. And now you're going to notice I have something weird going on. And what's weird is it's all flat. And the reason why it's flat, if I go into my relationship area, I don't have a relationship between that date table and my other table. So what I'm going to do is scroll down and find my journal entry date. Let me find it. There it is, journal entry date. And I'm just going to drag that up to date up here. And once that connects, I like to double click on the line to make sure it's connected properly. So yes, I'm getting the journal entry date from the GL table and connecting it to the date table over here. And it'll be a many to one cardinality. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now when I go back, my report is built. The only other thing I'd want to do to it, if I click on it, so I have it selected, my focus is on it, my handlebars are around it, I'm going to click on the format icon. I'm a little weirdo. I like to put a border around it, but I'm going to go over to the data colors. I'll leave revenue green. I'm going to make expenses red and net profit I'll make black so it kind of matches what I have up above. So visually it makes sense. I could tell, I don't even have to look at the legend. It just kind of makes sense to me. So that's how we do the profit and loss one. Now, if I were to right mouse click, before I do that, I duplicated the page a little too fast. I only want net change. So what I'm going to do, and again, I could come in and on the page filter and put in, it doesn't include BBF, or as Jen mentioned, and she's absolutely right, I could take my period ID and drag it to page, and I could say is not 0, and then click on apply. And then that way I'm only getting the net change. I could have also done source document does not equal BBF. So now I'm going to right mouse click and duplicate this, and we'll call this one a balance sheet. And of course you would add titles on them as well. I'm just not adding titles. On the balance sheet, what we would do, on the revenue field, we're going to change that to assets. We want to leave it green. On the expenses, we're going to change that one to liability and equity. And we'll leave net profit the same here. Down here, I'm going to get rid of revenue and expenses and instead add in assets and liabilities and equity. I'm going to go in and make sure that the colors are consistent with what I wanted. And now I have a net change balance sheet, which I could pay attention to. Now for either one of these, this P&L and this balance sheet, you could also come in and add a particular department. You could add a series if you wanted to. You could add a category. You could put other filters on here, so you could do a lot of slicing and dicing in between. So you could really kind of make it as cool as you want it to be. Now I want to get into a little bit of detail here. So what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to come in and add a slicer. And this time I'm going to come in and use the year from my date field. And because it's a numerical value, it puts it in this kind of value. So I'm going to change it. Whoops. Click on that drop down and make it a drop down list. So now I've got this drop down list for my year. That'll be a little bit easier for me to work on. And I'm going to add in a matrix. So let's add in a matrix here. All right. So on my matrix, what I'm going to do is in my rows, I'm going to add in let's stretch that out so we can see it a little bit. I'm going to put in the account number, the account description, and I'm going to grab that payee field. So now I've got all of those in. In the values, I'm going to grab net credit or net debit. And then in the columns, I'm going to put in month. All right, let me look at a particular year. There we go. So now I'm looking at my numbers all the way across. If I were to go ahead and expand, it looks like I have duplicates because I see subtotals. So what I'm going to do is go to Format, go to Subtotals, and turn off my row subtotals. Now I'm not seeing all that noise. I'm going to click on this particular arrow. This is our drill down arrow. So now if I were to open up one of these and double click on the account again, whoops, petty cash was a bad example. Let me go in and look at another one. This is payables. There we go. If I open that up, I can see it's summarized by month, by vendor. Now, I could have used journal entry number here if I wanted to do that as well, or date. I could have put in a date and saw the net change per date. Either one of those would work just fine. So I get this as kind of a little cool way of looking at our numbers here. And I think it's pretty nifty. I get excited. Now, this is looking at net change. Now, again, I would want to make sure I remove my beginning balance if I want to remove beginning balance. But instead of removing beginning balance, I want this to show each month year to date. I want to see the year to date across, all the way across. So what I'm going to do, I want to make sure that I'm going to collapse the date and then make sure that I've got my focus here on my GL accounts. And what I'm going to do on the home ribbon is choose new quick measures. And because I did the date table, I can now make it where I could use the date as part of my formula. So these are all the quick measures that are out there, and you can manually create any of these. And so I'm going to choose year-to-date total. And very simply, I'm going to grab that net debit and put it in the base value. And then on the date, I'm going to come in and choose the date from my date table, the one I said was my master date, and then click OK. And now I have this new field called net debit year to date. So if I were to come back over here, I can replace this value with net debit year to date. And so right now I'm seeing them side by side. Let me get rid of net debit. So now, and that would be a way where you could do month to date and year to date. But now I'm looking at the year to date balances. You can notice that they're changing and growing as we go across. And there were other options in that new quick measure as well, where you could go in and do month to date. You could do year over year. You could do percentages. There are a lot of other ones you can create manually as well. So I want to point that out. But that's pretty cool. Now, if your period happens to be where you're not on a month, you're on like a 445, these kind of date functions are not going to work for you. Unfortunately, you're going to be stuck with manually creating them through DAX. That's only going to work if your periods line up with months. It doesn't matter if you're on a calendar year or fiscal year, but your period has to line up with months for that to happen. So that's pretty nifty. Love that feature. All right, so now that we've got that done, what I want to do is, let's see, I'm going to take this year one. I'm going to clear it. I'm going to copy it two more times. Well, just maybe one more time. And I want to get the category here. So I'm going to drag the category into here. So now I have a filter that shows me the individual category. So I'm going to get rid of the category. Oh, I didn't have category, so that works out well. Okay, good. And what I'm also going to do is put in a clustered column chart up here. There is method to my madness, I promise. So what I'm going to do is once again take the net debit and put it in the value and the account number in the access. And the reason why I did this is if I come through and select one of these, I'm going to see an account number there. So again, method to my madness. All right. Not always, but there is today. So we're going to call this one summary. And then over here in the detail, I want to add that T account thing. So I'm going to click on this ellipsis and choose to import it from the marketplace. And on the marketplace, I'm going to add T account. There it is. So I'll click on add. And I'm going to add this down at the bottom. And I'm just going to populate it. So what I'm going to populate it with is, as I mentioned before, I'm going to take, why not take the payee? We'll put it in as the ID. We will take the net debit amount and put it in as the sum. And our account number will go into accounts. And now it should automatically populate for us. While I'm at it, I'm going to click in the blank and I'm going to add, oops, not that one. I'm going to add a multi-row card. Shrink that up, move it over here. And in this one, what we're going to add is the account category and the net debit. Again, there's method to my madness. Okay, so I'm going to come over here on the summary, and I'm also going to choose year. I'll copy that whole visual there, and I'm going to paste it over here. I'm going to say, I'm not going to leave it syncing, but, and I put it behind. Let's move it over. And then one more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a donut chart, and on my donut chart, this is just to give you an idea of some of the things you can do. I'm going to take net debit, put it in value, and under date, I'm going to go back, collapse that up, there we go. And under date, put the month in as the legend. All right, so this is going to be my detail information. So the reason why I did this, so if I were to come in and grab, for example, 2027, you could see the numbers appear there. Not sure why the month is showing all of that, but anyhow. All right, what we're going to do is take advantage of using this drill through feature at the bottom. We're going to take account number and drag it into this drill through down here. And we're not going to set any of these, but we've got our account number listed right there. And it's all set up, and we're just going to go ahead and leave it set to leave filter on. You're also going to notice there's a little dim back button up here that we have selected as well. So what I'm going to do is go back to my summary page, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, let me get 2027 again. And I'm going to choose maybe sales. I'm going to hold my control key down, and cost of goods sold. All right, so these are my categories that I have selected. And I can see the individual accounts up here. And it's smart enough to know if I were to right mouse click on one of these bars, I get this drill through option. And if I had named the page, it wouldn't say page 1, it would say detail, for example. And when I go back, now my page is set where all I've synced to match that detail. So I said, just show me the detail for that account. So it was just in the category called sales. Here's the net debit by month. I didn't sync my year. If I'd sunk my year, then that would have been synced up as well. But I have my beginning balances right there. So that's pretty cool how you could kind of go back and forth. And the back button doesn't always work for me. So what I like to do is I'm going to come into summary here, and I'm going to go to view and turn on bookmark pane. And I'm going to bookmark this pane just by clicking on add. And we will rename this. I just double click. We'll call it summary. And I'll close that out. Now back on page 1. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this filter. And for this particular visual, it automatically takes me to format. So I'm going to go to action and change it instead from back to a bookmark. And I'll tell it to use the bookmark called summary. So now if I held my control key down and click, it takes me back to that front page, or back to that summary page. Now I'm going to take this particular visual. I should have done this earlier. And I'm going to open up the sync slicer. And on this one, I'm going to sync it to page 1. So now I should have that slicer on page 1 as well, and it's automatically synced. So when I go back and forth, if I were to come now and say, all right, I don't want, I want everything, and I'm going to, whatever this account is, I'm going to right mouse click, drill through to page 1. Now I'm looking at that particular, it happened to be accounts receivable. I'm looking at accounts receivable, and it's just the year 2027. If I changed it so that I'm looking at 2028, and I drill down again. Why did my sync not work? Well, you get the point. I'm not going to go through a lot of that. Let me go back to my slides for just a moment because I'm already over by 18 minutes. Let me see if I can wrap this up in the last 2 minutes. And thank you for everybody who hung in there. On the slide deck, I do have the T account visual that I use, so you could download it. I also have copies of the formula I used to create the DAX table, to create my DAX columns, including the net debit, the net credit, the fiscal period, if you wanted to create that in DAX. And if you're on a calendar year, that works beautifully. That payee field, the revenue, expense, net profit, assets, and liabilities. And then I've already asked you the question about the demo gift. And I've got the slide deck down below. So does anybody have any other questions? And my apologies for going over, and thank you for everyone who hung around till the very end. There are a lot of things that you could do to extend this to significantly farther than where it is now. There are a wide array of visuals. You can get into the nitty-gritty. getting that detail, that operational part, that's not going to be super helpful on the financial statements itself for a lot of individuals. Instead, what you're going to want to get into is that nitty gritty of evaluating the details of what's going on. Looking at it like this, maybe not so super helpful. But if I took the same visual and I turned it into perhaps a waterfall. So here now I'm looking at it. Let's see, account number, account description, payee in month. And I'm looking at each month and I could see the year-to-date breakdown. I might want to come in now and say, all right, instead of looking at it like this, maybe take the account category. I'm going to come in just for simplicity. I'll put it in this visual filter. And in this visual filter, I'm going to come in on the account category. Oh, I have the category up here. I could have just used it right there. Let me do that. Okay, so I could come in and say, don't show me cost of goods sold, just show me sales. And now I could see, all right, this is what my sales are doing. And this is where I talked about you might want to use the net credit versus the net debit. Perhaps I want to create a year-to-date for net credit as well, but instead I'm going to just take net credit and put it in. And now I could see over the year 2027, my sales are gradually increasing, it looks like. So this is a good thing. It looks like over the year over year, I'm in good shape. I could also come in and maybe I want to just do a comparison year over year. So if I took out the years on this particular visual, I might want to also take out the month and I might want to add in the year. And now I can look and see what this is doing on a year over year basis. And why did that not work the way I wanted it to? Let's go back and go back. Gotta love undo. All right. So I want to put year in there. Get rid of month. There we go. So now as I'm looking at it, I can see, all right, each year is going up, but not going up. It looks like it's going up less and less each year. So there's a lot of things I could look at without getting this in the detail. If I were to try to look at this year over year in that matrix form, it might be harder to tell what's going on. It looks like, oh, my sales are going up. That's great. Is it? I don't know. But if we went back and looked at it in the waterfall, I could very easily see, yep, it is indeed going up, but it's going up a smaller amount every single year. And that may not be a good thing. That doesn't look to be good at all. So there's a lot of things that we would want to pay attention to as we're going through this. All right. Oh, thank you, Jen. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this up because I went way over. I hesitated on whether balance sheet should be a different one, and I decided on no. Again, thank you everyone who stuck around to the very end. I appreciate it, and I will get out for those of you who requested it, I'll get that information out to you as soon as possible. So it should be before Friday for sure because I'm leaving town tomorrow afternoon. So you should have it before tomorrow afternoon before I leave town. And also, point of note, this recorded video will be on our Njevity site. If you go to njevity.com and go to events, you can see the recorded area and it'll be in the reporting area as soon as we can get it out there. So thanks everyone. And if I don't talk to you soon, have a happy holiday. Bye.